Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're the show that helps you get informed fast. Today we're diving into something that's fascinated people, and maybe frustrated them too for, well, centuries. Predicting earthquakes. Can we really know when the next big one is going to hit? And maybe more importantly, if not, what can we actually do?
It's a really interesting question. And this deep dive, we're going to unpack that whole complex world. We'll look at the history, the early optimism,
Right.
then the big scientific hurdles, and where we are now, which is much more about seismic safety, preparedness, things that are working.
And we've got a good mix of sources for the scientific papers, some historical case studies, which are quite something, and real-world project info, too.
Yeah, the mission, I think, is twofold. First, understand why that crystal ball prediction is so tricky, so elusive. But second, and this is key, highlight the proactive stuff, the science-backed efforts making places safer. We'll even look closely at a big project in Armenia.
Okay, let's get into it. This dream, this quest to predict earthquakes.
Yeah.
It's had its ups and downs. Back in the 70s, things felt different.
Oh, definitely. There was huge optimism then. Scientists genuinely felt, that a practical method was just around the corner. It seemed achievable.
But that feeling didn't last.
No, not really. By the 90s, after a lot of attempts didn't pan out, skepticism really grew. People started asking if true prediction, was even possible. Today, most scientists are pretty pessimistic about it. Some even argue it's inherently impossible. They'll say things like, our understanding of earthquake predictability remains immature.
Okay, so this is important. We need to be crystal clear on terms because you hear prediction and warning used sometimes interchangeably. What's the core difference for you, the listener?
It's absolutely critical. Prediction means knowing beforehand when, where, and how big an earthquake will be. That's the holy grail, I suppose.
The thing we haven't found.
Right. Warning systems are different. They kick in after an earthquake has already started. They use the fact that the first seismic waves, the P waves, travel faster than the damaging S waves.
Ah, so it's physics.
Exactly. Those key waves aren't usually the damaging ones, but they arrive first. So a warning system detects those and sends out an alert, giving nearby areas maybe seconds, maybe tens of seconds, of warning before the stronger shaking hits.
Okay, so that is achievable. We have systems like that.
Yes, that technology exists and is used. It's distinct from trying to forecast an event weeks or months out.
Got it. So the problem with true prediction is basically we haven't seen verifiable successes beyond just, random chance. Claims get made, but they often fall apart under scrutiny.
Precisely. And that leads us into why it's so hard. The search for reliable precursor signs that an earthquake is imminent has been extensive, but ultimately kind of fruitless on a reliable scale.
This is where it gets fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole idea of animals knowing beforehand. Those stories are ancient.
Oh yeah, reports go back thousands of years. Dogs barking, snakes leaving hibernation, things like that.
So is there anything to it?
Well, maybe. Animals might sense those faster P waves a few seconds before humans feel the main shaking. That's plausible. But the idea they give warnings hours, days, or weeks ahead. Big scientific reviews, like one in 2018 looking at over 130 species, found, insufficient evidence.
So maybe they react to tiny force shocks we don't notice. Or it's just coincidence.
Could be. Or something called the flashbulb memory effect. A big shocking event happens, like an earthquake, and our brains kind of link unrelated things that happened just before it, making them seem connected.
Interesting. So animals aside, what other avenues did science explore? You mentioned precursors.
Right. It's fascinating how many different paths were tried. Back in the 70s, a big one was the dissolved tensy diffusion hypothesis.
Okay, that's it.
Based on lab experiments. When rock is under stress, just before it breaks, its volume changes slightly, it dilates. This, in theory, affects things like how seismic waves travel through it or its electrical resistance.
And that seemed promising.
Initially, yes. There were a couple of early informal successes that led to, let's just say, wildly over-optimistic statements. But the problem was lab results didn't really scale up to the messy, complex reality of the Earth's crust. The assumptions were flawed, some results questionable, maybe some cherry-picking of data after the fact. The whole idea kind of languished.
So that one fizzled out. What else? Changes in seismic wave speeds.
Yeah, specifically the ratio of P wave to S wave speeds, the VPVs ratio. Again, lab tests showed changes near rock failure. Some early reports, particularly from Russia, claimed success in the field, but later analysis cast doubt on those results. Some informal predictions in the U.S. around 73, 74 were likely just flukes. Reports of significant velocity changes pretty much stopped appearing after about 1980.
Okay, another dead end, it sounds like. What about gases, like radon?
Radon emissions, yeah. Radon is a radioactive gas produced naturally in rock. It's easy to detect, has a short half-life, so in theory, spikes could signal short-term changes. There were claims, like one linked to the 2009 L'Aquila earthquake in Italy based on radon levels, but again, these remain really controversial. No consistent, reliable link has been established across different quakes and regions.
Seems like a pattern here. What about electrical or magnetic signals?
Another big area of research, electromagnetic anomalies. In Greece, there was the Van method, claiming to detect seismic electric signals.
How did that go?
It generated a lot of buzz, but also generalized skepticism, as one review put it. Issues were found with the methods, like stations being too close to sources of human-made electrical noise. And kind of worryingly, their predictions were statistically more likely to follow an earthquake than precede it, probably due to how earthquakes cluster and the very wide time windows they used.
Not exactly predictive then. Any other electrical clues?
There was the Corralitos anomaly before the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake in California. A supposedly unique magnetic signal was recorded.
But just once.
Apparently. They deployed more instruments afterwards, and despite several more large quakes nearby over the next decade, nothing similar was ever seen again. So, doubts arose. Maybe it was unrelated magnetic interference or just a faulty sensor.
Wow. It feels like they are really trying everything. You also mentioned Fronian physics. Ionosphere stuff.
Yeah, that's the idea that stress in the rocks creates electrical charges that travel up and disturb the Earth's ionosphere. Some researchers claim to record ultra-low frequency, ULF, disturbances days before shallow quakes.
But the mainstream seismology community wasn't convinced.
Generally, no. Several reasons. Stress in the crust builds up slowly, likely not fast enough to generate these big currents. Decades of searching haven't found statistically reliable electrical precursors. And importantly, the ground is wet. Any currents generated deep down would probably just be absorbed by groundwater before reaching the surface or ionosphere.
You can almost feel the scientific effort and maybe frustration in all this. So many leads, so many dead ends for reliable prediction.
It really highlights the immense complexity of earthquake processes.
So, okay, looking for these specific warning signs hasn't really panned out. What about looking for broader trends in earthquake activity, like patterns over time?
Right. Another approach. We have the basic elastic rebound theory: crust strains, breaks at a fault, snaps back. That explains the long-term cycle, but doesn't give you short-term timing. Then there was accelerating moment release, or AMR. This was the idea that maybe foreshock activity ramps up kind of exponentially right before a big earthquake.
That sounds intuitive, actually, like things getting busier before the main event.
It does seem plausible, and there was excitement about it for a while, but when scientists really rigorously tested it statistically, those trends didn't hold up reliably. Often, apparent trends were just artifacts of how the data was analyzed, or didn't properly account for the fact that earthquakes naturally cluster together anyway. Interest in AMR really faded after about 2004.
Okay, so even sophisticated pattern spotting has been difficult. Now, what about the really modern tool? Machine learning, AI. Can computers find patterns humans miss?
That's definitely a current frontier. There are some promising results, especially in lab settings using machine learning on acoustic signals, from simulated faults to forecast failure, for example. And deep learning has shown some success in predicting where aftershocks are likely to occur with better accuracy than older models.
But the big challenge is
data, really.
Yeah.
Getting enough high-quality representative data for the truly big catastrophic earthquakes is incredibly difficult. They just don't happen often enough in well-instrumented areas. And interestingly, sometimes simpler statistical models perform just as well as complex neural networks, which suggests maybe it's not just about raw computing power, but about the fundamental nature of the data or the process itself.
So the bottom line for now seems to be predicting the when and where with useful precision. Still largely out of reach.
Yeah, that seems fair.
But crucially, this isn't where the story ends. It's not about giving up. It's about shifting focus, isn't it?
Absolutely. Since precise prediction isn't really feasible, the focus shifts very logically and effectively to what we can control. Robust safety measures, better building codes, public awareness, preparedness, proactive safety.
And Armenia provides a really compelling real-world example of this shift in action. They face a significant risk.
A very significant risk. Armenia is in a highly seismic zone, and the memory of the 1988 Spitak earthquake is still very real there. Magnitude 6.9, 25,000 people killed, over 500,000 homeless, 190 schools destroyed. The economic cost was enormous, maybe $15–20 billion.
Just devastating. And the risk hasn't gone away.
Not at all. Since just 2020, they've had 14 quakes magnitude 5 or higher, plus thousands of smaller ones. And a lot of their infrastructure, especially schools built during the Soviet era, wasn't designed for this.
How vulnerable are we talking?
Well, estimates suggest about 1,000 of the country's 1,400 public schools face a real possibility of collapse even in just a moderate earthquake.
Wow. That vulnerability, especially schools, must be a huge driver for action.
It absolutely is. And this connects to a global challenge. School safety in seismic zones is a critical issue worldwide. In Armenia, it led to the Seismic Safety Enhancement Project.
Tell us about that. What's the goal?
It's a $6 million project co-funded by a Japanese fund, the Japan Fund for Prosperous and Resilient Asia and the Pacific, or JFPR, and the Armenian government. It fits into Armenia's larger national plan to strengthen schools.
So a targeted project within a bigger strategy. What are they actually doing?
Two main things. First, strengthening infrastructure. They're piloting this with the reconstruction of the Voskaghat Secondary School near Yerevan. It's being rebuilt to withstand very strong shaking MSKIX standards, using innovative, cost-effective engineering, drawing a lot on Japanese expertise.
What kind of techniques?
Things like Taishin Hokyo reinforcement. That's a Japanese method for strengthening existing structures and seismic dampers, which help absorb the energy of an earthquake. But it's not just the structure. The design includes accessibility, proper sanitation, climate resilience features, even spaces the community can use after school. Plus, they're creating maintenance guides and training staff. It's quite comprehensive.
That sounds incredibly thorough.
Yeah.
Building back much, much better. What's the second part of the project?
The second output is focused on increasing awareness and resilience among people, especially young people.
Why target the youth specifically?
They're developing an awareness program for 200,000 students, aged 10–19. The idea is that this age group can be real agents of change, taking knowledge back to their families and communities. They learn about the risks, how to respond.
And again, leveraging international experience.
Definitely. A key part is bringing Armenian officials and engineers to Japan for a study visit. Japan has immense experience, obviously, with earthquakes and safety standards. Learning from their practices and building reinforcement and public education is invaluable.
It's great to see that kind of practical knowledge sharing.
Yeah, and the resilience focus is broad. They're putting air pollution sensors in schools, doing climate education. They're implementing regular earthquake drills, the classic drop, cover, and hold on, inspired by Japanese schools. Life skills, emergency kits.
Really building a culture of preparedness.
Exactly. They're even using social media, appointing goodwill ambassadors, celebrities, influencers to promote safety messages, and importantly, involving the community. During consultations for that Voskaghat school, locals had input on things like landscaping, site layout, practical stuff.
That community buy-in sounds crucial. It shows it's not just a top-down thing.
Mm-hmm. It makes it sustainable.
So let's try and wrap this up. This deep dive, it seems, shows us a clear path. Prediction, the crystal ball kind, is still eluding science.
Yeah, the challenge there remains immense.
But the real story, the actionable story, is about resilience.
That's the key takeaway. Investing in solid infrastructure, like seismically safe schools, sharing practical knowledge, like Japan is doing with Armenia, and crucially, building widespread public awareness and preparedness. These are things that work. They save lives.
The Armenia project really feels like a blueprint for that. A proactive approach focused on community, on long-term resilience, rather than waiting for a prediction that might never come.
It really is. It shows how you live with seismic risk, responsibly and proactively.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener. Think about how this shift from chasing perfect prediction to building measurable preparedness changes our whole relationship with hazards like earthquakes.
It moves us from maybe a place of passive fear towards one of active readiness. Empowerment, really.
And maybe ask yourself, what other big, seemingly unpredictable challenges could benefit from that same shift in focus? Less predicting, more preparing, something to think about. That's all we have time for on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.